The stars burned like dying embers, and Earth was no longer the blue world that had once glowed with life. It was fire now. Oceans turned to steam, cities to glass, and voices to silence. From the bridge of the battleship Horizon's Edge, Captain Mira Solon watched the planet fade beneath clouds of ash. Her heart ached, but her face stayed calm, cold as steel. Orders came and went around her. Evacuation codes, distress calls, desperate cries, but she heard them as if through water. The Shirai Armada had come without warning. Their ships were unlike anything human scanners could fully record, shadows of metal and light that cut through space like blades. Their weapons didn't explode. They erased. One flash of that cold white light, and a continent vanished. Earth's defense grid, the pride of the Terran Alliance, had fallen in hours. No one had ever faced such power. Mira's voice broke through the chaos on the bridge. "We can't hold them," an officer cried. "Then buy time," she said. "Evacuate every survivor you can. Humanity will not die silent." Her crew obeyed. They had seen her lead battles before, had watched her stare down odds that no one survived. But this was the end of home. Ships fled from Earth like sparks from a dying fire, carrying millions of terrified people toward the stars, toward anything that wasn't death. The Shirai followed, methodical and merciless. Among the crew stood a man who didn't belong there, a quiet figure in worn gray armor, without rank or insignia. His name was Orrin Vance, husband of Mira Solon. He wasn't a soldier, not a pilot, not even part of the fleet. Once, he had been an engineer, one of the brilliant minds behind humanity's first deep space forges. Now he was just a survivor clinging to his wife's command ship as the universe collapsed. He looked out through the viewport beside Mira, his eyes reflecting the burning Earth. "They said they'd never reach Sol," he murmured. "They said the gods of the stars would protect us." Mira turned to him, her expression softening for the first time that day. "There are no gods here, Orrin. Only choices." The Shirai didn't speak the languages of men, but their actions carried messages clear enough. They believed themselves the cultivators of the cosmos, beings who drew strength from the energy of stars, shaping it as others shaped metal. To them, humanity was primitive, blind creatures, too frail to bend the heavens to their will. Humans had machines, yes, but no cultivation, no connection to the divine power that flowed through the galaxy. Against the Shirai, humanity's ships were paper, their weapons sparks against stone, and Orrin Vance was the weakest of them all. He had no psionic link, no genetic gift, no augmentation. Even among humans, he was ordinary. But as Earth fell and the black ships of the Shirai swept across the system, something stirred deep inside him. Something quiet, cold, and ancient. It wasn't power, not yet. It was a whisper, like the faint hum of machinery that had slept for centuries. When the Horizon's Edge turned from Earth, fleeing through the burning ruins of orbit, Orrin stood alone at the viewport. The stars beyond looked endless, but he could feel a pull, something calling to him from beyond the light, beyond what humanity had ever reached. His hands tightened against the glass as the whisper grew louder, like a voice made of metal and memory. Mira called his name and he turned back to her, the echo fading. He said nothing. She didn't press. There was no time. Behind them, Earth cracked apart as the Shirai's final barrage hit the core. The blue world was gone. Only silence filled the void. The last home of mankind had fallen, but in the heart of one powerless human, a new fire had begun to burn. It was faint, almost invisible, but it would one day light up the heavens. The war did not end with Earth's fall. It only scattered humanity across the cold dark. What remained of the Terran fleets drifted toward the Bastion system, a dying red sun surrounded by fields of broken rock. There, in the shadows of shattered moons, the survivors built their refuge. Bastion became humanity's last breath, a fortress made from wrecks and hope. The system was quiet, forgotten by most maps, and that made it a place to rebuild. The red light of the old star gave everything a constant twilight glow, dim and haunting. The air inside the station smelled of oil and metal, and every corridor echoed with the sounds of tools and tired hands trying to create something out of ruin. The people who made it there were no longer citizens or soldiers. They were ghosts of a dead world, holding on to scraps of purpose. Mira Solon had become admiral now. The fleet she commanded was a patchwork of scavenged ships. Cargo haulers turned into war vessels, mining rigs armed with stolen cannons, and a handful of surviving battleships from the Sol Defense Force. Every day, she trained her people, taught them how to fight smarter, not stronger. Every night she stared at the empty comm channels, listening to the silence of the worlds they had lost. The Jirai hunted them still, appearing from time to time in small waves, probing, testing, reminding the humans that the darkness had not forgotten them. Humanity was holding on by sheer will, not power. Orrin Vance lived quietly among them, though everyone knew who he was, the Admiral's husband, the man who had survived Earth's fall without firing a shot. He wasn't treated with anger, but with pity. The others called him the Silent One, a human with no gene mods, no psionic resonance, no cultivated energy. To the few survivors who had seen the Jirai's power, a man like Orrin seemed painfully small, like a candle beneath a dying sun. Still, he worked harder than anyone. He repaired engines, built drones, wrote code that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. There was something about him, something in the way he looked at broken things, as if he saw what they could become instead of what they were. One evening, while exploring the wreck of a Jirai destroyer floating in the asteroid field, Orrin found something strange buried deep within the alien ship's core. It was not a weapon or a machine, at least not one he understood. It looked like a fragment of metal, black and silver, glowing faintly as if it were breathing. When he reached out to touch it, it hummed under his fingers. A pulse of energy shot through his body, and for a moment the entire wreck seemed to vanish around him. He saw a sky not of stars but of forges, vast burning furnaces shaping galaxies. A voice spoke in the darkness, neither male nor female, neither human nor alien. "You were meant to cultivate the void, child of flesh," it said. But you reached for the forge instead. The vision vanished as quickly as it came. Orrin stumbled back, gasping, his hand still clutching the fragment. The metal felt alive, warm like a heartbeat. He took it back to Bastion without telling anyone, not even Mira. Over the next few days he began to dream, dreams of light, of a blade forged in the heart of a dying star, a sword that could bend the fabric of space itself. He learned its name from the whispers that followed him even when awake. Etherian, the Sword of Dawn. It was not a weapon of the Shirai, nor of humans. It was something far older, a relic from before the first civilizations learned to touch the stars. In the quiet of his workshop, Orrin studied the fragment, and each time he held it, he felt it studying him back. The shard hummed when he breathed, and when he spoke, it seemed to listen. He didn't understand what it wanted, only that it was waiting for him to become something more. Outside, Bastion flickered with the faint hope of a reborn humanity, unaware that deep in one of its silent corners, a broken man and a forgotten relic were about to change the fate of the stars forever. The days in the Bastion system passed like drifting dust, slow and heavy, but Orrin Vance no longer felt time the same way. The fragment he had found, the strange living shard from the Jirai wreck, had changed him. In the quiet of his workshop, hidden deep inside a hollowed asteroid, he began to shape the impossible. He studied the shard for weeks, connecting it to fragments of human alloys and circuits, testing it with energy flows no human technology could survive. The shard drank power like water. Every experiment ended with light bursting across the room, or machines melting from the strain. Still, Orrin pressed on. He wasn't guided by reason anymore, but by the voice that had spoken to him that night, the one that called itself Etherian. It whispered in dreams, in the hum of metal, and even in the silence between his heartbeats. "Forge the dawn," it would say, and his hands would not stop. Piece by piece, he built a weapon that defied sense. It was no simple sword, no machine of war. It was both and neither. A blade forged not of steel but of thought, energy, and will. Its hilt was human-made, assembled from ship metal and plasma conduits, but its core was the shard, pulsing like a star in miniature. When he held it for the first time, the air around him vibrated, and the red light of Bastion dimmed as if the sun itself bowed in respect. The blade glowed with a light that wasn't light at all, a shifting, living radiance that flickered between matter and energy. It felt alive and it felt hungry. The moment he gripped it, the voice returned, clear and cold. "You are the last forge, Orrin Vance. Feed me." At first, the weapon overwhelmed him. The moment he tried to move with it, His body shuddered as if his blood had turned to lightning. He dropped it, gasping for air, his skin burning with faint golden lines that vanished seconds later. But the strange thing was, he felt stronger afterward. His mind clearer, his movements sharper, his senses keener. Each time he picked it up again, it felt less foreign. The sword wasn't only a tool, it was teaching him, reshaping him. His body began to change bit by bit. The calluses on his hands hardened like steel, his eyes reflected faint streaks of light, and his heartbeat echoed like distant thunder. The blade was rewriting him from within, turning him into something new. He practiced in secret, training in the empty asteroid caverns where no one could see. The sword sang when he swung it, the hum deep and smooth like a storm gathering beyond the stars. Every strike left trails of white fire that cut through stone as if it were paper. But power came with a cost. Each time he fought, he felt his strength drain faster, his breath shorten, his body tremble. The sword consumed energy, his energy. It fed on his life, his will, his fire. When he slept, he dreamed of stars collapsing, of suns devoured by an endless light. Yet when he woke, he did not stop. Something inside him told him this weapon would one day decide the fate of everything. One night, Mira found him. She had followed the energy readings that flared from his workshop and found him in the middle of a training session. The blade's glow filled the chamber like sunlight, its edge cutting the air with a sound like singing wind. Mira froze as she saw the look in his eyes, half human, half something else. "Orin," she whispered, "what have you done?" He lowered the blade slowly, the light fading. "I found a way," he said softly. "A way for us to stand against them." She looked at him, torn between pride and fear. "You can't fight the Zirai alone." He gave her a tired smile. "I know," he said, "but I can make them afraid." Outside, the bastion sun flickered red and weak, and in the darkness beyond it, the Shirai were gathering again. Their armada moved like a shadow across the void, preparing to finish what they had started. As the fleet of black ships approached, Orin stood in the hangar, the sword humming quietly at his side. He could feel their presence, their power pressing against the edge of reality. The blade pulsed once, and the whisper came again, this time like a promise. "The heavens will fall, and you will rise." The man who could not cultivate looked toward the stars with calm eyes. He knew the storm was coming, and he was ready to meet it. The storm came without warning. The Shirai armada emerged from the dark edge of the bastion system, their ships blacker than space, moving in perfect silence. To the human scanners, it looked like a wave of shadows swallowing the stars. At the heart of the fleet was a ship so vast it could eclipse moons. The Warden of Silence, command vessel of the Zirai warlord Vieltor. Its weapon, a gravity cannon that could crush worlds, hummed with energy, warping space around it. Across the scattered human outposts, alarms screamed. The sky above Bastion's red sun filled with the faint blue glow of shields coming online and the desperate flares of engines pushing human ships into formation. The air in every command center turned heavy, filled with the quiet knowledge that this battle might be the last. Admiral Mira Solon stood at the command bridge of the horizon's edge, her gaze fixed on the sea of dark ships before her. Around her, her officers moved quickly, shouting coordinates, charging weapons, rerouting power through systems patched with old parts and prayer. Every ship in the human fleet had been built from scrap, worn freighters, mining barges, cargo carriers. But together, they looked like a swarm of sparks standing against a storm. "All ships," Mira said, her voice calm through the chaos. "Hold formation. We fight for the fallen. We fight for Sol." Her words carried through every speaker, to every pilot, every soldier, every refugee listening from the stations on the asteroids. Across the fleet, 1,000 human voices answered as one. The first Shirai salvo came like a breath from the void. Beams of white fire streaked through space, cutting through the nearest human ships. Explosions bloomed like tiny suns. Still, the humans returned fire. Plasma bolts and missile swarms shot forward, turning the darkness into a storm of light. The Zirai's black hulls drank most of the energy, reflecting it back or dissolving it entirely, but a few shots landed, cracking through their armor. For every Zirai ship that burned, 10 human ships were lost. Bastion shook under the force of the bombardment. Inside the horizon's edge, crew members worked without rest, bleeding, burning, but refusing to yield. Mira's heart clenched as she watched her fleet crumble, but her eyes stayed clear. She gave no sign of fear. Humanity had been running for too long, and she had promised that Bastion would be where they made their stand. Then in the middle of the chaos, a voice filled the comms, deep, cold, inhuman. "Surrender, remnants," it said, echoing across every channel. "The weak cannot resist the heavens." It was Vialtor, the warlord himself, his tone filled with cruel amusement. The bridge went silent, the words hanging heavy in the air. Then from behind Mira, another voice spoke, quiet but steady. "Maybe," Orin Vance said, stepping forward, "but the heavens have never met me." He wore a plain suit of silver armor, nothing like the heavy plates of the soldiers. In his hand, he carried the blade he had forged, the Sword of Dawn. It shimmered with a strange white glow, pulsing gently, as if it were alive. Mira turned to him, her expression caught between love and terror. "Orin, what are you doing?" He met her gaze and smiled softly. "Ending this," he said. Before she could stop him, he walked toward the launch bay. The crew stared as the hangar doors opened to the void, but Orin didn't hesitate. The sword hummed louder, its light wrapping around him like a storm. With one last glance back at Mira, he whispered, "For Sol. For you." Then he stepped into the black. The sensors on the horizon's edge went wild. The readings spiked beyond limits, lights flickered, and communications dropped. On the viewports, the crew saw something impossible. A single human figure floated in space, no ship, no suit, surrounded by a blinding white aura. The Sword of Dawn blazed in his hand, and the light grew until it rivaled the red sun itself. All across the battlefield, the Shirai ships turned their weapons toward him, but before they could fire, the light expanded, splitting the darkness like dawn breaking through night. Orin moved, faster than any scanner could track, a streak of white slicing through the endless black fleet. The humans watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The man who could not cultivate, the one they had called weak, stood alone against the heavens, and for the first time, the heavens trembled. No one could explain what they saw that day. The moment Orin stepped into the void, space itself seemed to bend around him. He stood against the darkness, small and fragile compared to the vastness of the Shirai armada. Yet his presence filled the void like a new sun. The Sword of Dawn blazed in his hand, a river of light running through the black. Every human ship turned its sensors toward him, but they failed to capture his image. The energy pouring from the blade broke every rule of physics their instruments knew. To the soldiers watching from their cockpits, it looked like a man wrapped in starlight, standing between their dying fleet and an ocean of monsters. Then he moved. The void rippled as if touched by wind. Orin's body became a streak of light that sliced through the darkness. And where he passed, Shirai ships tore apart, their hulls splitting open like paper. There was no sound, no explosion, just a blinding flash, and then silence. The Shirai, who had believed themselves invincible, screamed across the comms in their strange, harsh language. Their formation shattered as they tried to regroup, but Orin was everywhere at once. The Sword of Dawn hummed with a voice of its own, a deep, endless tone that echoed through the battlefield. Each swing of the blade cut through shields and armor, through metal and energy alike. The Shirai fought back with everything they had, plasma cannons, gravity bombs, dark matter lances, but the energy never touched him. It bent around the light that surrounded his body, disappearing like rain into the ocean. To the human fleet, it looked like a dance of light, one man moving through a sea of giants, each movement carving through the enemy with impossible grace. Inside the Warden of Silence, the warlord Vialtor watched in disbelief. His cold eyes narrowed as he felt the balance of the battle shift. "Impossible," he hissed. "No mortal can wield the void." He raised his clawed hand and gave a single command. Across the fleet, energy built as the gravity cannon of the Warden charged. Space began to twist, stars bending around a single growing point of darkness. The cannon's aim locked on Orin. Mira's voice screamed over the comms, "Orin, get out of there!" But he didn't move. He turned toward the massive ship, his expression calm, eyes shining with the same light as the sword. "No," he said softly, though no one could hear him. "It ends here," the gravity cannon fired. The beam wasn't light, but a tear in space itself, a force so strong it could pull moons apart. It struck Orin directly. For a heartbeat, the light vanished, and the battlefield went black. Every human ship fell silent, hearts stopped, breaths held. Then, from within the heart of that darkness, a single word echoed, carried across every frequency, every ship, every soul: consume the heavens. The words were not shouted. They were spoken with the weight of a dying star. The sword of dawn erupted. The light that burst from Orin's body swallowed the beam, devouring its power, bending it inward until it collapsed on itself. The sword drank the energy of the cannon, of the warden, of the entire Shirai fleet. The explosion that followed was not a fire but a birth, a storm of light that stretched across the bastion sky. It was as if a second sun had been born. The shockwave tore through space, ripping the Shirai armada apart. Ships broke into dust, metal turned to vapor, and the void itself seemed to burn. For a moment, the red light of Bastion was drowned beneath the white blaze of a new dawn. When the light faded, silence returned. The Shirai were gone, their fleet reduced to drifting fragments. The Warden of Silence no longer existed. Only the stars remained, dim and distant, and at their center floated the Sword of Dawn, glowing softly among the debris. There was no sign of Orin. Mira called his name again and again through the comms, her voice cracking, her heart breaking, but there was no answer. All that remained of the man who could not cultivate was the blade he had forged, still shining faintly, as if waiting. Around it, the wreckage of the Shirai fleet drifted like ashes in the wind. The humans who survived would later swear they saw the blade pulse once, as though it still had a heartbeat. They would never forget that moment, the day a single human stood against the heavens and his sword devoured the sky. The light of that battle lingered long after the flames faded. The Bastion system, once a dying corner of the galaxy, became a cradle of rebirth. The Shirai had vanished into the void, their fleets destroyed, their pride shattered. The humans who survived drifted among the ruins, silent and trembling, watching the wreckage of their enemy float in the glowing dust of victory. When the scanners finally cleared, they saw it, the Sword of Dawn, still burning softly where Orin had stood. It hovered in the center of the void, untouched by gravity or time, its light calm and alive. No one dared to approach it for days. To the people of Bastion, it was no longer a weapon. It was a monument. They had lost a man but gained a legend, and in the heart of that legend, they found hope. Years passed, and humanity began to rebuild. From the broken hulls of their ships, they forged cities among the asteroids. They turned the scars of war into gardens of light, and the Bastion system became the new home of the Terran kind. They called it New Sol. The air was still thin, the gravity uneven, and the nights long, but it was theirs. Children grew up under the dim red sun, learning stories of Earth, the blue planet their ancestors had lost, and of the man who had given them another dawn. His name was spoken with reverence. Orin Vance, the man who could not cultivate, who had stood against gods and turned their power into light. In the heart of New Sol, they built the Hall of Heroes. Its walls were carved from the metal of the horizon's edge, the ship that had led the last defense. At the center of the hall stood a glass chamber, and within it, suspended in pure light, floated the Sword of Dawn. Its glow never dimmed, no matter how many years passed. People came from across the system to see it. Some knelt, some prayed, some simply stared. To many, it was proof that humanity's spirit could outshine any force in the stars. To others, it was a mystery, how a simple man, with no power, no cultivation, had become something beyond all understanding. Mira Solon, now older and slower, often visited the hall alone. She would stand before the glass, staring at the sword that once hummed in her husband's hands. Her hair had turned silver, her uniform worn, but her eyes still carried the same fire. Every time she stood there, she felt the faint hum of the blade through the floor. It was almost like hearing his heartbeat again. "You kept your promise," she would whisper. "You didn't let them take us." Sometimes, when the hall was empty, she swore she could hear a low voice answer, distant but gentle, as if carried through the stars. The galaxy beyond New Sol changed too. News of the Shirai's defeat spread through the systems, and other alien races that had once ignored or enslaved humans began to take notice. They called the event the Devouring of the Sky, and they feared it. Some believed the humans had found a weapon that could destroy suns. Others whispered that humanity had awakened a force older than creation itself. But the truth remained hidden in the silence of space. The Sword of Dawn never moved again, but its light reached farther than anyone could measure. a beacon shining even through hyperspace storms and nebula clouds. One night, many years later, as Mira stood in the hall beneath the faint glow of the blade, the lights flickered. The hum that filled the room deepened, and the glass around the sword trembled. She stepped closer, her breath catching. The light within the sword of dawn pulsed once, bright, strong, alive. Mira's eyes widened, tears blurring her vision. "Orin," she whispered, her voice trembling. For a heartbeat, she felt warmth spread through the room, as though unseen hands had brushed her cheek. Then the hum faded, the sword dimmed back to its soft glow, and all was still again. Outside, far beyond the Bastion system, in the silent stretches of the void between galaxies, something stirred. In that endless darkness, a faint light flickered, small, distant, yet steady. A whisper echoed through the emptiness, old and familiar. "The forge is not finished," it said. "The sky is hungry still, and somewhere, beyond the reach of any star, a new dawn began to rise. As if the man who had devoured the heavens was still out there, waiting, watching, ready to rise once more when humanity needed him again."